You're listening to a production of the National Media Archive. To learn more or volunteer, go to nationalmediaarchive.com.
Picture this. It's August 1991, and the Oceanos, a 500-foot cruise ship, is ready to set sail from Durban, South Africa. But here's the twist: this isn't your modern floating city. The Oceanos was built in 1952, a product of a time when cruise lines often bought and refitted old ships because new builds were just too expensive. Words like refit and charter come to mind. Think of a classic car that's been tuned up for Uber service. So, why did cruise lines risk using these older vessels? The answer lies in the economics of the industry and the relatively untapped South African cruise market. But as we'll soon see, these choices came with consequences. Are you ready to step on board and see what unfolds? Now, you might be wondering, was the Oceanos really seaworthy? Let me tell you a story. Passengers arriving at port described the ship as rusted and clearly worn down. On paper, it had a capacity for 550 passengers and 250 crew, with all the trappings lounges, a casino, a sun deck. But with terms like bulkhead and non-return valve, there's a lot that can go wrong beneath the surface. Imagine your house's plumbing patched with old, mismatched parts. The Oceanos' water disposal system had just been hastily repaired, and the consequences of that would soon cascade through the entire ship. Did anyone really notice? Or did everyone just hope for smooth sailing? Let's talk geography. The Oceanos was scheduled to travel along the Wild Coast, a name that says it all. This stretch of the South African coast is notorious for freak storms and violent seas. Meteorologists talk about gale-force winds and 30-foot swells. Imagine trying to balance a dinner tray in a bouncy castle during a hurricane. The cruise's final leg was supposed to be routine, but the weather had other plans. As winds picked up and swells battered the hull, the captain faced a classic maritime dilemma: delay and disappoint passengers, or risk the journey to stay on schedule. What would you have done in his shoes? Here's where things took a turn. Below deck, a critical pipe, the main seawater intake, had a faulty non-return valve. When freak waves hammered the Oceanos, that weak point gave way. Seawater flooded in, reaching the propulsion engines. In engineering terms, this is called progressive flooding and loss of propulsion. To put it plainly, it's like your car engine shorting out after a flooded street. Suddenly, the ship lost all power. Passengers upstairs heard a thud, the lights died, and panic started to ripple through the lounges. Now, ask yourself, would you know what to do if you were stuck in a powerless ship in the middle of a storm? Now, you might be thinking, where was the crew in all this chaos? Shockingly, as water rose below, the officers panicked. While terms like abandoned ship and mayday are drilled into every sailor, the crew instead lowered lifeboats for themselves, often half empty. Picture a fire drill where the teachers run first and leave the kids behind. The passengers, left in the dark, literally and figuratively waited for instructions that never came. Let me ask you, in a crisis, do you expect the people in charge to stay and help, or to save themselves? Let me tell you about Moss Hills and Julian Butler, two entertainers who stepped up when leadership vanished. Instead of fleeing, they organized passengers, made distress calls, and coordinated lifeboat departures. This is the classic chain of command turned upside down. In crisis management, there's a term called emergent leadership, when ordinary people rise to extraordinary circumstances. Have you ever seen someone unexpected take charge and save the day? On the Oceanos, it was the band, not the bridge, that kept hope afloat. Here's where logistics met disaster. The Oceanos had 6 lifeboats, theoretically enough for everyone. But with the ship listing or leaning dangerously, launching the remaining boats became impossible. The technical term here is freeboard, the distance from the deck to the waterline. As the ship tilted, lifeboats on one side dangled uselessly. Now more than 220 people were left aboard, watching water creep up the hull. Imagine being told, there's no room left. What would go through your mind at that moment? It's 2 a.m. and hope is fading, but then salvation arrives from above. The South African Navy and Air Force scrambled helicopters for a massive rescue. In rescue lingo, this is called a multi-platform extraction, using different vehicles to save lives. Helicopters hovered, winching people up 20 at a time, while inflatable boats ferried others. Picture the coordination: pilots, divers, Navy officers, and merchant sailors all converging on a single, sinking ship. Why did this work? Because when systems fail, human solidarity and quick thinking can still prevail. When the duster's sea spray settled, every life had been saved, but questions swirled like eddies around the captain and crew. Maritime law uses the term duty of care, the legal and moral responsibility to protect those on board. The captain, found among the first rescued, claimed he could better coordinate from shore. Sound familiar? Inquiry boards later found him and his officers guilty of dereliction of duty. Meanwhile, the entertainers and rescue teams became heroes. Isn't it striking how adversity reveals real character? So, what's the big takeaway from the Oceanos disaster? First, the importance of redundancy multiple safety systems cannot be overstated. If one valve fails, backup protocols should kick in. But even more critical is the human element. In crisis leadership, we talk about situational awareness and adaptive decision-making. The Oceanos story shows that equipment matters, but courage, improvisation, and teamwork can turn potential tragedy into a maritime miracle. Next time you step on a ship, remember, sometimes your safety depends on the most unlikely heroes.